Today's lesson is called The Devil and Tom Walker. Hello everyone, my name is Jeff.
My name is Roger. Today we're going to be talking about a little piece of literature, and it's a short story written by the American writer Washington Irving, and it's all about the devil and a guy named Tom Walker.
Yeah, at this point I have no idea who Tom Walker is. That's a pretty common name, Tom Walker, but there's no mistaking who the devil is. The devil is the supreme evil being in the universe. We're talking about Satan. I don't know what the devil and Tom Walker have to do with one another, but I'm sure if we start reading, we will find out. Anyways, the name of our story is The Devil and Tom Walker, and we'll get started with things right after this.
The Devil and Tom Walker.
By the 1700s, it was well known throughout Massachusetts that the notorious pirate, Captain Kidd, had buried his treasure somewhere near Boston, but those who had attempted to find it always came up empty-handed. Some believed that this was because it was guarded by the devil himself, but no one could say for sure.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 notorious， 这个字是形容词，指恶名昭彰的、声名狼藉的。例如 Police were often called to the notorious nightclub as fights regularly broke out there. 常有人通报警察到那家恶名昭彰的夜店，因为那里常发生打架事件。另外，补充一个相关片语 be notorious for 加名词或是动词 ing 表示因点点点而恶名昭彰。举例来说 This beach is notorious for its strong currents, so be careful when you swim. 这个海滩的强大海流是出了名的危险，所以你去游泳的时候要小心。或是 His dinner parties are notorious for having extremely spicy food. 他办的晚宴上因为有超辣的食物而恶名昭彰。
Okay, so let's summarize our story here. This is an old story from the early 1800s, and again, it's all about the devil and Tom Walker. So by the 1700s, it was well known throughout Massachusetts that the notorious pirate Captain Kidd had buried his treasure somewhere near Boston, but those who had attempted to find it always came up empty-handed. So this story, even though it was written in 1824, describes events of the 1700s. And by the time the 1700s had arrived in Massachusetts, which is the state where Boston is, it was well known throughout that state, or that colony, I guess it was at the time, that the notorious pirate Captain Kidd had buried his treasure somewhere there, but no one could find it. So, yes, we're talking about a pirate here, and he's notorious. I think you all know what a pirate is. Those are those guys with the wooden leg, and they go, I vast there, me hearty, shiver me timbers, walk the plank. And, of course, they've got a parrot on their shoulder and stuff like that, and they've got a patch over their eye. And so this is a pirate here by the name of Captain Kidd, and he was notorious. Notorious means that you're famous because you're a bad guy.
So this guy here, Captain Kidd, he wasn't known for being a kind and caring individual. He was known for being a nasty pirate. He had a bad reputation for his piracy and stuff like that, so they called him a notorious pirate. Anyways, Captain Kidd here had buried his treasure somewhere near Boston. That's the idea. But those who had attempted to find it always came up empty-handed. So there is this rumor going around. Yeah, Captain Kidd, he buried his treasure around here. Let's go try to find that treasure. We're going to dig it up and we'll all be rich with Captain Kidd's money. But whenever someone tried to find it, they came up empty-handed. That means no dice, try as they may, they were not able to recover that treasure. They came up empty-handed each time.
Yep, came up. That's the past tense of the phrase to come up, which basically means the result of something, or it describes how things happened. In this particular case, these people came up empty-handed. They simply just had nothing. They had nothing to show for their efforts. They failed in their attempts to find that treasure. Now, some people believed that this was because it was guarded by the devil himself, but no one could say for sure. And indeed, if you're trying to find treasure that's guarded by the devil, that's going to be quite difficult because the devil actually is a quite powerful person or a quite powerful being, and that's the person you don't really want to fight against, because if you get on the wrong side of the devil, you're going to go to hell, and you're going to burn forever.
There you go, the devil, yes, very powerful, also very sneaky. So it's going to be hard to find that treasure if that sneaky devil character is guarding it. He'll always make sure that he's one step ahead of you guys. He'll outsmart you every time. The devil, not a nice guy, and full of tricks. A very deceptive character. Anyways, folks, with that, it's time for us to take a short break, but don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
Tom Walker, a wretched, greedy fellow, happened to be walking through an old abandoned fort in a swamp on the outskirts of town when he came upon a peculiar man covered in soot. The man, who called himself Old Scratch, struck up a conversation with Tom, offering to disclose the whereabouts of Kid's treasure at a price. Tom needed some time to consider the offer, so he returned home, where he recounted to his wife the details of the encounter.
第二部分我们看到形容词 abandoned 指舍弃不用的或是无人居住的。例如 I reported the abandoned car that was parked in front of my house to the police. 我向警察举报了停在家门口的那辆废弃汽车。或是 The abandoned hospital was now inhabited by homeless people. 那间废弃医院现在被游民给占据了。接着我们看到单字 outskirts 这个字是名词，指郊区。举例来说 My house is located in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. 我家位于郊区，一个安静的社区。另外，补充一个同义名词 suburb, S-U-B-U-R-B, suburb. 我们可以说 Many parents prefer raising their children in the suburbs because they're safer than urban areas. 许多父母宁可在郊区养儿育女，因为比城市要安全多了。再来，我们看到片语 strike up 表示开始交谈或是建立关系，开始往来。例如 Dale wanted to strike up a conversation with Gina, but he was too shy. Dale 想要和 Gina 聊天，但是他太害羞了。或是 Kevin struck up a partnership with Chuck when he opened this beauty shop. Kevin 开这间美容院时，和 Chuck 建立了合伙关系。再举一个例子Claire struck up a friendship with me in Paris. Claire 是在巴黎跟我开始建立这段友谊的。接着，我们看到单字 recount 这个字是动词，指讲述或是描述。我们可以说 With tears in her eyes, Jan recounted how she was attacked by a stranger. Jan 含泪讲述她被陌生人攻击的过程。或是 The victim tried to recount how the accident happened.那名受害者试着描述事件是怎么发生的。
Okay, let's continue talking about the story here. We've got a person by the name of Tom Walker here. And how would we describe him? Well, he was a wretched, greedy fellow, and he happened to be walking through an old abandoned fort in a swamp on the outskirts of town when he came upon a peculiar man covered in soot. So, okay, again, we've got Tom Walker, and he's wretched, which means he's kind of low class. Maybe he's not very well dressed, and he's not very happy, and he's kind of vulgar, and he's probably not a really wonderful kind of person. He's not really the kind of person that you'd want to take home and introduce to your mother. He's just a low-life scum kind of guy. And he's also very greedy, okay? He likes money, and he's very stingy probably. And, of course, he just happened to be walking through an old abandoned fort. If something's abandoned, people have left the place. Something's left behind, like there are old abandoned buildings in big cities. The buildings are still there, but there are no people inside them.
Anyways, we've got Tom Walker finally. He doesn't sound like a very nice fellow to me. He sounds kind of wretched, miserable, and also greedy. Now, he's walking through this abandoned fort in a swamp on the outskirts of town when he came upon a peculiar man covered in soot. By the way, the outskirts of town, that means you are near the outer edge of that particular town, okay? If you are in the center of town, you are definitely not on the outskirts of town. But if you move towards the edge of that town in any direction, once you get towards the edges, the boundary of that town, let's say, you can be said to be on the outskirts of that particular town. And apparently this guy, Tom Walker, he came upon a peculiar man covered in soot. By the way, peculiar, that means weird, unusual, strange. The list goes on and on.
And soot here is not pronounced soot. It's pronounced soot, like the word good or book. It's got that sound. So soot, of course, refers to some kind of black stuff. It's kind of like dirt, but it's something that has been burnt before, but maybe not totally. So yes, there'll be a lot of soot in a campfire, for example. So don't put your hand into a campfire because it might get covered with soot, or you might even burn yourself there. But indeed, this is a very dirty man covered with soot, and the man who called himself Old Scratch struck up a conversation with Tom, offering to disclose the whereabouts of Kid's treasure, but at a price. So here we've got the phrase to strike up something. That just means you begin to do something. If you're a band leader, for example, you might strike up the band. You might tell them to start playing. Or if you meet somebody interesting at a party, you might strike up a conversation with them. You might start talking to them. Hey, hello, how are you? My name is Roger. What's your name? Hey, where are you from? Hey, what do you do for a living? Etc., etc.
So they struck up a conversation. They started to talk with one another. And Old Scratch offered to disclose the whereabouts of Kid's treasure to Tom at a price. By the way, here, if you disclose information, you share sensitive information with someone else, or you tell them a secret, okay? Before that information was hidden, it might even have been top secret and no one knew the truth about it. But now you have disclosed that information and people know the truth. So here, Old Scratch, he's got a secret. He knows where this treasure is, and I'm willing to give you this inside information. I'm willing to let it go, to disclose it, if you pay me. That's what it means when you use this phrase, at a price. Sure, I'll wash your car and wax it at a price. I'm not going to do it for free. No way, no how. It's going to cost you money. I'll do it, but I'll only do it at a price. Further, he's going to disclose the whereabouts of this treasure. When we're talking about the whereabouts of something, we're talking about the location of that thing.
Exactly. So he's going to tell him where the treasure is at a price. You could also say for a price. It's going to cost you, I'll tell you that, but it's going to cost you something. It isn't going to be cheap. And Tom needed some time to consider the offer, so he returned home, where he recounted to his wife the details of the encounter. So he wasn't quite sure of this deal. He said he needed to think about it, and he would get back to Old Scratch later. And so he went home, and then he told his wife all about this encounter. He told him all about meeting this guy, Old Scratch, a peculiar guy covered in soot. So here we've got the verb to recount. That just means you tell somebody about something after it has happened. You basically describe what happened.
Like if you go to a police station after a bank robbery, and you're not the robber, The police might ask you to recount the events that occurred. Okay, the robber walked in and said, "Everybody give me your money." That's what happened. You were there, you saw what happened, and later on you told the story of what happened. You recounted this story. Anyways, folks, with that, it's time for us to take a short break, but don't go away. When we come back, we'll be wrapping up the first part of our lesson called The Devil and Tom Walker.
Tom's wife, whose greed surpassed even his, was furious he had not immediately accepted the bargain and went out by herself to retrieve the loot. She never returned. Her disappearance spurred Tom into action, and he set off to find Old Scratch, prepared to give whatever was asked of him in exchange for the treasure, which he was certain would compensate for the loss of his wife.
最后，第三部分，我们看到动词 spur， 指驱使或是促使。例如 Theo's love of video games spurred him to become a game developer. Theo 对电玩的热爱促使他成为一名游戏开发者。另外，补充一个相关片语 on the spur of the moment 表示一时兴起。这里的 spur 是名词，有刺激或是鼓舞的意思。我们可以说 We didn't have any plans, so we went to the movies on the spur of the moment. 我们没有任何计划，所以一时兴起就去看电影了。
Okay, so where we left off, Tom Walker had just talked to Old Scratch, and Old Scratch said, "Hey, I'll tell you where Captain Kidd's treasure is at a price. You'll have to pay me for it." And Tom said, "Well, let me think about it. I'll go home and tell my wife all about this." So in the third part of our lesson for today, Tom's wife, whose greed surpassed even Tom's, was furious he had not immediately accepted the bargain and went out by herself to retrieve the loot. So indeed, Tom had a very strict wife, just like himself. Actually, she's even greedier than him. Her greed surpassed even his. So here to surpass just means to go beyond something. In other words, she was more greedy than him or greedier than he was.
There you go. What a couple they are. We've got wretched and greedy Tom and then Tom's wife who's super greedy. I bet they make a great match. I bet it's a very warm and happy home they have together. Anyways, Tom's wife was furious. He had not immediately accepted the bargain and went out by herself to retrieve the loot. By the way, if you retrieve something, you go and you get something and you bring it back. You fetch that thing. But here, to retrieve the loot means you go and you get the loot and you bring it back.
Loot, that just means the valuable things there, money, jewels, or whatever. And it's kind of peculiar here because this is a word with two O's here, but hey, we don't say loot. We say loot here, even though S-O-O-T is pronounced soot. So she went back to get the valuable things herself, but she never returned. She never came back, and her disappearance spurred Tom into action, and he set off to find Old Scratch, prepared to give whatever was asked of him in exchange for the treasure, which he was certain would compensate for the loss of his wife. So, yes, he set off to find Old Scratch. He was spurred to find Old Scratch. If you're spurred, that means you are given some incentive. You have a reason to do something. So, hey, where's my beloved wife? I want to find her. So that spurred him into action. It got him moving, and he left to find Old Scratch, and he was going to give him whatever Old Scratch wanted for the treasure. And Tom thought that, hey, if I get that treasure, then maybe I won't be so sad at the loss of my wife. It will compensate for the loss of my wife. To compensate just means to make up for something.
There you go. So I lost my wife, but if I get the treasure, everything will be even. One thing will compensate for the other. Wow, what a wretched guy Tom Walker is. Anyways, though, folks, let's talk to someone who's definitely not wretched, the Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny， 我们来看今天的文法重点。故事的主角 Tom Walker 是一个讨人厌又贪心的家伙。那么课文第二部分提到说，当 Tom 走过一处废弃的旧堡垒的时候呢，他遇到一位全身布满煤灰的怪人。那文中是用到 He came upon a peculiar man covered in soot 来表达说他遇到一位全身布满煤灰的怪人。这个 soot 就是表达煤灰煤烟。好，那这边我们其实是要介绍片语 come upon， 它表示偶然遇到、偶然发现，后面可以接人或是事物。好，那这个意思其实就跟 bump into 或是 run into 或是 run across come across 或者是 chance upon chance on 是相同的。像我们可以说 We came upon this lovely cafe while taking a walk， 我们在散步的时候呢，偶然发现这间宜人的小餐馆。另外补充一个类似的用法，动词 stumble 也可以表达偶然发现、撞见，它是拼作 stumble stumble。 好，那么它当这个意思来解释时呢，是不及物用法，后面常常就会搭配介系词 across upon on 或是 onto， 再加上名词，用来表达说在没有预期的情况下无意间发现或是得知某事物。像 stumble upon the truth 就可以表达无意中发现的真相。那我们来造个例句， They stumbled upon a beautiful lake on their way to the town。 在他们前往那个城镇的路上，偶然发现一座美丽的湖泊。好，那课文第三部分提到说 Tom 的妻子比他更贪心，妻子的贪婪程度超过他。文中是用到 surpass 这个字来表达超过。那我们来学它的字首字根，先看到字根 pass pass 它有通过、通道的意思。那么在 surpass 这个字当中，它的字首 sur 是从 super 变形而来，用来表达超过，在什么什么上方。那字根 pass 它表示通过、经过，所以合在一起 surpass 就是表达超过、胜过，或者是优于什么什么的意思。好，那顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字哦。第一个是 passport， 大家应该都知道是护照的意思嘛。那它的字根 pass 就是表达通过，字尾的 port 表示港口。那我们就试着把这个 port 想成是 airport 机场的 port， 毕竟机场不是也叫空港吗？这就像是飞机的港口，对不对？那我们现在要出入机场、通过机场，你就要有身份证明，所以去想说passport 它就是护照的意思咯。第二个补充的是 password， 它的字根 pass 表示通过，那么 word 是文字嘛，能让你通行的文字那就是密码咯。好，再看第三个 trespass TRESPASS。 好，它的 TRES 这个部分呢是源自于拉丁文字首 TRANS， 这部分就表示跨越、超出。那么字根 pass 它表示通道，当你超出可以走的范围，跨越到禁止通行的地方，那就表示你是擅自侵入咯。那么 trespass 这个动词就可以表达擅自进入、侵入，像是侵入他人的土地建筑物等等。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Notorious. That lawyer has defended some of the country's most notorious criminals. Abandoned. The abandoned village used to be a busy trade center. Outskirts. Timothy just bought a small apartment on the outskirts of Paris. Peculiar. There was something very peculiar about the way he smiled at me. Disclose. Harriet refused to disclose any details about her plans. Whereabouts. Francine seemed reluctant to discuss her husband's whereabouts. Retrieve. Ian asked us to wait while he retrieved his luggage from the car. Compensate. Her willingness to learn compensates for her lack of experience.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you guys enjoyed reading and learning along with us. I am Jeff.
I am Roger. See you next time.